All right, welcome to another episode of DevOps Fundamentals. In this episode, we're going to talk about advanced DevOps practices. So, as usual, I'm Thiago Almeida at NZThiago on Twitter, and this is David.
David, Senior Technical Evangelist at DTZAR.
Cool. All right, so let's just jump into some of the topics that we found or practices that we found that are a little bit more advanced once you've mastered the main ones that we've been talking about.
You don't necessarily have to master them all, but typically we find that these ones are folks who have kind of gotten some of the other ones in place before they want to come here. Some of them there is some dependencies. So for instance, this one is one in particular where you probably are going to have a number of the ones in place. If not, I would say it's almost a requirement. Automated recovery. The first option, what we're talking about here, is called what we're saying rollback within the automated recovery bubble here. And so what happens there is, let's say you update the 2.0 version of the code and you push that out into production, and their 2.0 version of code breaks something. In a rollback scenario, what you would do is you would have, knowing that 1.0 is good, you would detect that problem and then push the 1.0 code, 1.0 version of the build, let's say, out back into production to try and reduce your outage, your downtime, and help with your MTTR metric, right? Mean time to repair or recover. And this, like I said, could you do this if you had zero of the other practices? Sure, but likely you're going to have things like continuous deployment enabled. You're going to probably have release management enabled, and the combination of those things, along with automated testing and APM and other things, are going to help you detect those things faster. Even testing in production, which we'll talk about in a little bit, can be used in conjunction with this to make this practice easier to implement. But the concept is, pretty straightforward, I think, for most folks to understand, is that, roll back to known good state to minimize the impact to your users that are out there. Roll forward, and we notice, some folks, especially if you've got a really advanced practice, most folks, I would say, do the roll forward option. Yeah. Because if you've got, let's say, for instance, a true continuous delivery pipeline in place, you've got a lot of testing, you've got a lot of rich data. Let's say you have application performance monitoring enabled. The code line level change. You may have even found the problem before you get to production. So you, quote unquote, roll forward with that change and push that into production. And instead of going to 1.0, you just, let's do 2.1.
With the fix
installed, and everybody's now on 2.1 with the fix.
Yeah.
There's a good kind of saying from Jez Humble that came up recently that is saying that your hotfix or change management for emergency releases or whatever should be likely the bar that you should shoot for normal releases into production.
Yeah.
And in that case, you would probably just roll forward and push it up. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you have database changes and a few other parts of your application. Usually it's easier to roll forward than try to reverse back to a previous state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as you get state in there, it gets messy, right? With the rollbacks. Yeah. Okay. Automated environment deprovisioning. This is one that I wouldn't necessarily say has to be in the advanced bucket or that you have to enable that has a ton of pre-dependencies. Perhaps some dependencies that might be there's infrastructure as code. Same thing with automated environment provisioning. And this is the basic concept that you've got a bunch of environments that are spun up. Usually it comes after the kind of self-service provisioning and infrastructure as code. But with great responsibility, or great power, comes great responsibility, right? Yeah. And so if you've got, let's just say, this amazing infrastructure as code template, and developers are, firing away and just pushing all kinds of things up there, there's a cost, right, associated with that. And so as a responsible ops person, this would probably be one where you would likely be more heavily involved. And it would be things like, how can I automatically delete or get rid of resources that are no longer being used? And this is, in terms of the dev side, I'd say this is really a partnership that, is there, where traditionally if you're the ops person or the company that says to the developer, it's going to take months or weeks to get your thing there, right? You have to change that paradigm and probably first get to self-source provisioning and infrastructure as code. Once you're kind of there, though, there's now an acceptance of, okay, you need to delete this, right? And you probably have got a workflow of how things are there, and you may have, there's the numerous ways, and we'll, for us anyway, since we're not going to demo this, you would use the Azure Automation Service to, let's say, deprovision resource groups or specific things on a whatever basis as it relates to your provisioning process or how developers are using these environments that they have. We also have something related called DevTest Labs. DevTest Labs also has policies and things to help you shut down VMs or clean VMs up to help with, having an efficient use of the resources that you have out there.
Yeah, and especially nowadays with the public cloud providers, that you can get charged by the amount of VMs that you have running or amount of infrastructure that you have with them. It makes sense to deprovision the infrastructure that you're not using, and that's the measure there, lower TCO that this practice will give you.
Yeah, I mean it's a different mindset, right? As soon as you go to cloud, the VMs are by the minute.
Yeah.
So especially if you've got a gigantic VM that's up there, 1 minute could save you hundreds of dollars, or a couple minutes, you're talking a good chunk of money, right?
So it makes sense for the ops person to know what the dev team have deployed to the environment, and for the dev team to know where their stuff is running. And if you're monitoring everything, you will be able to make a sensible decision of how to automate the deprovisioning of environments that you don't need anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Next one. Or a group of them.
Yeah, this is a group of one, which we're going to get deeper into these three with the subsequent slides here. But at a high level, there's a concept called hypothesis-driven development. And this is definitely in the advanced bucket because once you have a lot of things, fundamental of these DevOps practices enabled, a lot of things start to change. And it comes back to the concept of I'm spending this money, time, and effort for my developers to go and produce something, which I think the users are going to have value. Now, if you're like a lot of organizations, you may have, even if you're doing agile, you may have the business, have some good ideas. You may have done some user surveys and said the users really want this feature, X, Y, Z. And you go develop it and you're happy, and let's say you even get into production. Where I think a lot of people stop at is, that's kind of it. They may follow up with a survey later or something like that they go talk to their users. But in a true hypothesis-driven development, I almost say culture, the mindset is have a minimum viable product or an MVP that you can push to users and know, one, are they using it? Are they successful? All of these types of concepts, right? And that not only goes for the features of the usage, but it also goes for the architecture, right? I have this highly available infrastructure. Is that working? Is that useful? Is that completing what I think is going to be useful, right? So it's a big mindset shift, and within that bucket you have what's the first one there on the list is testing in production. Testing in production says I'm going to send a percentage of my traffic to my production users. And that is going to give you, right, that data, like real live data to that. Let's, in this example, it's 90-10. Could be whatever mix or percentage that you want. You're going to get live, real user data on that 10%. That gives you a lot of great stuff, right? It could help you say, is it broken, and give you the ability to kind of roll things back, but it could also tell you, are people using this thing? Are they successful at using it, right? And getting that feedback quicker before you roll it out to all of your users.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really, testing in production, I think, is really huge, and especially, and I know we say this is an advanced thing, but especially if you have, let's say, a large, traditional or monolith type application, this is hard, right, to do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have all the other DevOps practices enabled in place to make this happen. And there's a ton of different ways that you can light this up. And we're going to show you, or Tiago's going to show you with Azure websites specifically and how to do this with our product. But you could use things like Azure Traffic Manager. You could use various solutions that split traffic up to, even if it's an internal thing that helps only direct a certain chunk of the traffic.
Yeah.
You could have, let's say for instance, one part of your service that dynamically detects that part and goes to a separate subset. You could have only certain users who enroll in beta, right, go to one thing. You could have feature flags to help light this up, right? You enable certain feature flags, and those feature flags help light up a subset of the traffic for your production users. Right? There's a lot of options and a lot of ways to cover this. We're going to just talk about one of them today, but I would encourage you, especially no matter where you're at, and especially if you have really painful release processes, when you go to production, to think about how, because this is probably a longer term thing, especially with a traditional or monolith app. How can we try to start thinking about this?
Yep.
What are things in the way we're coding now, or the service, or the other things we have that we can start to try and implement this in our app? Yeah,
and especially if you're already confident with everything else, your production code is working fine. Now is start experimenting with how you could improve what's already in production, instead of always trying to chase up fixing bugs, fixing problems. Now you're going towards experimenting and improving your solution for your customers.
Yeah, and if you've got a large, let's say, change management, process of all these people have to sign off and buy in before the thing goes to production, that helps a lot, right? You say, well, let's push it out there. It's only 1% of people, or 5% of people, and we're gonna be, it comes back to this is really great in conjunction with the roll back, roll forward kind of thing, because you ideally, in conjunction with this, that helps, right? You can dial the traffic down to 0, and that becomes part of your roll back, roll forward plan, in this instance, to help minimize your risk and get you, have people start to be more comfortable with releasing features and code faster into production.
Yeah.
So let's keep on going here.
Here we go. Next one, user telemetry.
Yeah, user telemetry. This, there's the basic principle here is that within your code, and that lives in your app, you've got something that you're tracking that you care about, and that data then goes up to the telemetry service. And there's all kinds of products that do this. Ours, Microsoft's, is App Insights, and we're going to show you this a little bit later in the demo, but this is really important. This concept is really important because, there's one thing that we know, and if you watch the DevOps Dimension Bing video we did, that really comes through with experimentation, right? Is that even if you think you know what your users want, and they tell you that's what they want, that may not be what they really want, right? Because if you measure what they're doing and are they successful or not, that's the data trumps all, right? And so user telemetry is really important for that fact, because you're going to really know, are the users being successful at doing what you want them to accomplish? Are they even using it, right? Because the worst case is I think for the company and especially developers, you go off and code something away for 2 weeks or a month or who knows, even longer, and then turns out nobody's even using it. And on the flip side, right, I think it could be probably really rewarding for a developer to know that their stuff is really being used, right? So if you did do something successful, knowing that it was successful, kind of important, but yeah.
All right, and the last one, fault injection.
Fault injection. So this one is definitely an advanced one, and this is really where I would say you want to be more evolved, more advanced, because of what the nature of this one is.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing here is, the analogy that I like to give is this. Us ops people and most people in general are familiar with backups, right? People know about backups, and oh yeah, we have a very fault-tolerant, highly available backup solution. Okay, great, awesome. You got the highly available backup solution, no problem. Well, then the question that comes next sometimes is, well, When's the last time you tested it? and then the rubber really hits rubber meets the road, right? Because you could be doing backups for years, and if you never test it, then you may find that, well, your backups really don't work, and then everything you've been doing is a total waste. And I kind of think about this in the same way with fault injection, because let's say you have a highly redundant, fault-tolerant database system, right? Cluster or whatever, or front end. Maybe you've got a whole series of front end servers that have scale, and you're saying any one of those could go down anytime and it's no problem. Well, the kind of analogy to the backup thing of testing your backups, fault injection would be test your highly available infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that could be via manual means, if you want to start there, right? Just power down half of the SQL server, right? Kill the instance, right? If you want to just go in there and do it. But if you get more advanced, you could have an automated process. You know, I think a lot of people point to Netflix in this space and the Chaos Monkey and the Simian Army, where a lot of folks are, you know, they have a suite of tools that inject failures for all kinds of things. And you don't, you know, typically, right, you're going to, that requires a lot of practice and guts, because likely you're going to have, you know, practices in place to help recover from those kinds of failures. And you're going to have a plan, you're going to have a way to quickly push changes or updates to your infrastructure and or your builds or your codes to kind of back that up.
Yeah, make sure it's really resilient.
Yeah, you're gonna have a lot of preparation and probably a lot of other fundamental DevOps practices in place before you start powering down servers or killing them at random.
Or like Netflix, a whole region.
Yeah, just delete a whole data center and just see if you still live, right? You know, just unplug the cable, right? And see what happens, right? Okay.
All right, so we have one demo for you to show user telemetry and the test in production sample. So let's jump into that. So here we are back into our my Azure portal, where we have the Parts Unlimited solution deployed. And for the DevOps Funds the website, the main production website for our solution, you see that I have also a deployment slot called staging, which we've been using to deploy solutions. So what I set up when we looked at the release management part of the episode for release management, I set it up so that I deployed an update to the site that's in our staging slot, so this DevOps web staging, and one in production. So the production one, if I go into the code here, it has a discount of 20% on the page, and the staging one has 90%. And we want to pit the two of them together, sort of like in I call it the Thunderdome test, to see which one of them will do better. And
the Thunderdome,
Thunderdome,
all right. Yeah, bring on the dome.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll see which one does better. I suspect the 90% discount will win, but we'll have to see. And you leave out those two. You make sure that there's traffic. If anyone that's going to production, you randomly assign 50-50 who's going to get 90, who's going to see 20. And then over time, you'll see which one is doing better, and then you can keep that slot as the main slot. So the way to do that from here, if we have the at least one deployment slot, we can go into traffic routing and enable traffic routing so that for my staging slot, I'll give it 50%, and then it'll auto update the production slot to 50% as well. So once I save that, it's now whenever you browse to the production slot, it's actually going to route people between the two. So I had open here just to show you the production one, DevOps Fund Web, showing 20%, and now DevOps Fund Staging, it was showing, let me go to the first one here, it was showing 90%. And then in that case, what I've done as well from the application inside side of things, if I go here, I created a custom event from the trace that says, say for example here, the one I'm showing is, it's creating an event called carousel test, and the type is DO20, And when I pushed or committed all the way to production, the 20% one, it had carousel test DO20. So the way to check that is I saved a couple of searches that you can go from search, one for DO20. I'll just expand the time range here to show us the last 48 hours. You can see that there were 5 people in production on the production slot that clicked on DO20. So that's 5 custom events. And if I go to DO90, you can see that there's been 9 of those clicks there as well.
So imagine that. People want a 90% discount over the 20%.
Yeah.
That's a shocker, huh?
So that gives us a very clear view that people definitely are liking the deal, the 90%, and then we can decide to go ahead and make that the production slot for a web app.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to call out here that, I mean, this starts to get into, the combination of user telemetry and testing production gets into kind of the concept of experimentation. And if you really want to get into that, it is a lot more complex. There's a lot of science behind experimentation. So you can get, depends on how specific you want to get here. I mean, and in this case, we're saying, 50-50 traffic, probably over some time, you start to get an idea of one versus the other. But there's a lot more to it if you really want to get deep into experimentation. For that, I'd recommend you check out the DevOps Dimension episode we did with Bing and some of the resources that we mentioned there on how if you really want to get into it, on how to drive an experiment, how to know who wins, and there's a lot of other things you want to think about here, but this at least gives you a flavor of how you can light this up fairly easily, and this is, I think, one of the big advantages of Azure Websites and our App Insights technology being used together, because you could get that up and running fairly quickly to get the foundation to run experiments. Yeah, and if you implemented your solution so that you can enable specific features for specific users, then as long as you have the telemetry to show you which users are clicking on the discount in this case, then you'll be able to tell which one is doing well or not. Yeah, and you can, there's ways to export all the raw data as well, for instance, from App Insights. There's, you can plug that into Power BI. You can start to do a lot of different queries and advanced things on the data that you get here that is beyond the real scope of this module. Yeah. But gives you the idea. Cool. Yeah. All right, so that was it for that demo, just to give you a quick overview. And if we go back to our slides, we just have one last slide. This is the last episode of the series. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't watched all the other episodes, then do check them out. I've had a lot of fun with other people from Microsoft that helped me present. And as usual, check out DevOps Dimension. If the Bing episode that we mentioned today isn't out yet, it should be pretty soon. And at the end there, we have the hands-on labs for Parts Unlimited. There's a couple of labs there for App Insights and telemetry, so if you want to check that out, that's in there as well. Yeah, so since we're on the last module, we'll go through all of the options there. The top one is going to give you kind of our home Microsoft landing page for DevOps. There's a lot of different things that we push in that space. The middle one that's there is the aka.ms/DevOps Learn. There are a number of courses that relate to DevOps from various topics, Azure automation, there's things like PowerShell and a number of other technologies that relate in different ways to DevOps, and that's a good resource to check out. That's an MVA? Yeah, so that redirects to an MVA kind of course page. And then the second to last one, the DevOps Maturity Self-Assessment, that one's really good to get a kind of ballpark, I would say, of where your organization is at across a lot of the things that you should care about. We have this concept that we call 7 habits, and we give you a score on where your organization is at across those 7 habits, as well as some tips. And that, I would say, you should be able to complete in no more than about a half an hour, as long as you have the right people, answering that know the different aspects to answer that. But it also would give you, the ability, one kind of higher level foundation to assess where you're at and maybe give you some ideas where you might want to improve and tie those back to specific DevOps practices that we may have already covered here in this fundamental series. Hopefully. So, hopefully, Okay. All right, so that's it for the series. Thanks, David, for joining me in this one, and hope you had fun as well.
Thank you.